Hello, my name's Darren, and welcome to the Maker's Rage podcast, Urania, or the Muse of Astronomy. So this is a continuation of the Muse series, the first episode being on the epic, with a corollary episode on the hero's journey. I'm not doing these in any particular sequence, although the epic Muse, Calliope, is traditionally considered chief of the nine, so it made sense to do her first. Urania is nonetheless regarded as one of the senior members of the sorority as well, named after her grandfather, Uranus, or Uranus, or if you're 12, Uranus. Today, astronomy is considered more a science than an art, yet the ancients regarded the study of the planets and stars as an art form, and linked it to astrology and divination. Even the planets were called musical spheres, because the ancients believed these celestial bodies emitted their own unique hum, and that they did so according to numerical ratios the Pythagoreans discovered when describing the pitch of musical notes, specifically notes produced by a string, and this is what links music and mathematics. Johannes Kepler, famed mathematician and astronomer, was also an astrologer who believed the celestial bodies' music to be audible, or that the music could at least be heard by the soul. This implied a sympathetic relationship between the souls of men and women and the planets and stars, though the stars are unreachable, inconceivably remote. In the 21st century, we've yet to set foot on a world farther away than the moon. We've sent probes and robots to Mars and other moons in our solar system, but even Mars remains too great a leap for mankind. And though astronomers today can see things the ancients and Kepler couldn't even imagine, they've yet to see any evidence that what happens on a star or planet light years away has any bearing on the lives of creatures inhabiting a single rock in the suburbs of one among billions of galaxies. And yet, dressed in a cloak embroidered with stars, Urania was the mystical link between the inaccessible heavens and human affairs. Her gaze always upwards, ever fixed upon the heavens. It's no surprise she became a muse of later Christian poets, like Milton in Paradise Lost, who invokes her directly. Descend from heaven, Urania, by that name if rightly thou art called, whose voice divine following, above the Olympian hill I soar. But being aware of her pagan origins, he's careful not to cross the line and says, the meaning, not the name I call. The meaning being the Holy Spirit, for whom she is a poetical stand-in. Her emblems are the globe and compass, not the instruments of a poet or musician, but a geometer, a mathematician. Eratosthenes, who measured the circumference of the earth by shoving sticks in the ground and examining their shadows, had more reason to invoke her than any Christian poet. The globe is not the earth, but the celestial globe, which shows the apparent positions of the stars in the sky, a map not of the earth and its continents, but of the spangled firmament surrounding it. Christ, when depicted as Salvator Mundi in Renaissance art, is shown holding an orb, recalling this emblem of Urania's. And though this orb is often understood to be the earth, over which he is supposed to have dominion, the right association would extend his dominion to include not just the earth, but all the stars above and surrounding it. Her other emblem, a compass, is just a simple technical drawing tool for making circles and arcs. As a divider, it can also be used to mark distances on maps, useful in geometry, drafting, navigation, but again, not so much in poetry and song. Some of the most important theorems in mathematics and geometry have been proved using just a compass and a straight edge or ruler. Indeed, proving some constructions insoluble or impossible, like squaring the circle, doubling the cube, or trisecting an angle, wouldn't be achieved until the 19th century. And with tools far more sophisticated than a compass and a straight edge or ruler. And though not useful tools for so useless an activity as writing poetry, they are crucial to one of the most useless activities ever devised, writing horoscopes. What it has in common with geometry is the fact that it reflects our species' mania for discovering patterns. even when there are none. Our predilection for seeing faces on the moon, Virgin Marys in rocky outcrops, or penis-shaped anything, is also manifested in how we choose to group stars into constellations. The asterism known in America as the Big Dipper is better known in the UK and Ireland as the Plough. In German it is known as the Great Wagon. The Norse called it Odin's Wain. In Vietnam they see a great rudder. In Malaysia, a boat. In Burma, it is a crustacean like a lobster. In Indian tradition, the 7 stars comprising the Dipper were called the 7 sages. We tend to name them after things familiar to us, in other words. Hence the Inuit referring to the Dipper as the caribou or reindeer. And our vantage point on Earth makes us see these groupings very differently than they'd appear to us if we stood on Mars, say, or on a planet in another solar system. If you examine them closely, you'll notice the 7 stars in the Plough or Dipper vary in brightness or magnitude, as well as distance, with the nearest one, Mizar, being almost equidistant between Earth and the star furthest from us in the constellation, Alpha Ursa Majoris, which incidentally points to Polaris, or the North Star, whose stable position in the northern sky enabled navigators to discover unknown continents. It's actually a triple star system, but to the naked eye, looks like a single point of light, a lamp to encourage adventurous sailors tired of always hugging the shoreline, a reassuring beacon for more wary seafarers, fearful of the sea monsters and dragons that lurk in the depths. The North Star stays fixed as the hinge of a compass, however far its limbs are stretched, whether on a map of the earth or of the sky. A far more significant star, of course, than Polaris is the one nearest us, our Sun. The ecliptic is the great circle on the celestial sphere, or Urania's globe, that represents the Sun's apparent path through the year. It's called the ecliptic because lunar and solar eclipses can only occur when the moon crosses it. The Zodiac is a belt extending 9 degrees on either side of the ecliptic, taken from the Greek Zodiakos kuklos, or circle of animals. Because most of the constellations through which the ecliptic passes represent animals like Pisces the fish, Capricorn the goat, Scorpio, Leo, Cancer the crab, Taurus the bull, and Aries the ram, invoked by Chaucer at the beginning of the Canterbury Tales. When in April, with its shower sweet, its tender crops, and a young sun, had in a ram his half-course run. Also referring to the ram is Dante, thought to have been born in May. He does so in La Vita Nuova, when he describes his first encounter at age 9 with Beatrice, his lifelong muse. 9 times since my birth, he says, had the heaven of light returned to almost the same point in its orbit, when to my eyes first appeared the glorious lady of my mind. Before this moment, he says in the book of his memory, little could be read, but upon seeing her for the first time, he writes, Incipit vita nuova, here begins the new life. Wallace Stevens called Dante's La Vita Nuova the greatest of all Christian poems, but nowhere does Dante acknowledge Urania as his muse. For him, there is only Beatrice. And forgive me for not pronouncing it the Italian way, it's just easier saying Beatrice. Anyway, here I am back to hugging the shores of poetry, and though I've called astrology a useless pursuit, so much of our poetry is influenced by it. Consider the word influence itself. From influenza, in medieval Latin it meant being influenced by the stars, as the disease we call by the same name, which we've since shortened to the flu, because in the Middle Ages it was thought epidemics were also caused by the stars, as is the human temperament. For if you happened to be born when certain planets were rising in the sky, like Jupiter, say, you would have a jovial or happy disposition. If Saturn, a Saturnalian or gloomy one, Mercury would make you mercurial or changeable, erratic, impulsive. And as for Venus, well, that will make you venereal. No need to elaborate on that. But speaking of love, how does Shakespeare describe perhaps the greatest lovers in our literature, Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed, meaning the position of the stars at their births determined they could never be together. A tragedy, a disaster even, from the Italian disastro, literally ill-starred. You can imagine the people who built Stonehenge or Newgrange, who relied upon the movement of the stars, including the sun, to predict seasonal patterns, when to plant, when to harvest, would say if you were born when an inauspicious alignment of heavenly bodies could be seen, the pattern of your life would be decided thereafter, if not by the stars directly, then by the community who determined by this alignment that you are not destined for great things. Rather unscientific, of course, but scapegoats are needed to prevent the apocalypse. Why else would they come together as a community to build these spectacular structures, if not doing so meant the world would come to an end? Nowadays, astronomers look to the skies for a more empirical sign of impending doom, like a wayward comet or meteor, but there are still many who'd interpret a wayward space rock as a sign of something more than chance. For how could beings as important as we be destroyed by chance? Johannes Kepler, mentioned earlier, who inherited Galileo's mantle and played just as big a role in demystifying the heavens, was nevertheless employed by the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II as imperial astrologer and cast detailed horoscopes for friends, family, patrons, though it seems he took a dim view of astrologers claiming they could predict the future. Kepler's most important benefactor, though, was the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, who didn't insist he waste his time on horoscopes, but help him develop his star catalogue and planetary tables that would help with the computation of the positions of the then known planets and stars to a greater level of accuracy than ever before, and provide observational evidence that the Earth is not the centre of the solar system, that it moves around the Sun in an elliptical orbit, exploding the geocentric Ptolemaic model once and for all. Copernicus waited until after his death to publish the work that contradicted this, and Galileo was sentenced to house arrest, and had he not had powerful friends, might have been burned at the stake like Giordano Bruno, for disseminating a heresy confirmed by the evidence of his eyes, and after being forced by the Inquisition to, quote, abjure, curse, and detest these opinions, was heard to murmur defiantly in reference to the earth, and yet it moves. The Church may force a retraction, burn all the evidence, and declare a scientist's work heretical, but the truth will eventually out, if not in Catholic Italy, then in the Protestant North. Incidentally, it was only in October 1992 that John Paul II finally apologised for the Church's treatment of Galileo, almost 400 years before. He might have escaped to the Netherlands. Indeed, he was offered a professorship there in Leiden, but like Socrates, he stayed home to face the music. And with his house arrest, the Church ensured Italy would become a scientific backwater for more than 100 years. Even in Galileo's own lifetime, the collaboration of Kepler and Brahe indicated the scientific revolution was moving north. Incidentally, Tycho Brahe named his observatory Uraniaborg, the castle of Urania, the first custom-built observatory in modern Europe, though it did lack a telescope. The magnifying glass that was transformed by Galileo from a toy to a scientific instrument, with which he was the first to observe lunar craters and the moons of Jupiter. Despite his house arrest, Galileo, who was born the same year as Shakespeare, lived far longer than the bard, dying in 1642, which happens to be the same year Isaac Newton was born. Besides inventing calculus and the binomial theorem, devising the three laws of motion and the classical theory of gravity, besides discovering that light is composed of an electromagnetic spectrum, it can be easy to forget that Newton was also responsible for inventing the reflecting telescope. It was long known that curved mirrors behave like lenses, but it was Newton who first made use of this knowledge to construct an instrument whose technology is still being used in space telescopes today. And I'm sure, had the Greeks invented it, the telescope would have been one of Urania's emblems. but the first telescopes were only invented in the 17th century. Observatories had existed before then, of course, for thousands of years, with stargazers relying only on the naked eye to map the heavens. In the 2nd century BCE, the Greek Hipparchus didn't need one to create his magnitude scale of stellar luminosities, or to discover the precession of the equinoxes. He's also credited with inventing the astrolabe. Chinese astronomers in the 2nd century CE observed the first supernova with the naked eye. Abd al-Rahman al-Sufi in the 10th century CE makes the first recorded observation of the Andromeda galaxy and the large Magellanic Cloud. Around the same time, the Persian astronomer al-Biruni describes the Milky Way galaxy as a collection of nebulous stars. Also around this time, but half a world away in the Yucatan Peninsula, at the El Caracol Observatory in Chichen Itza, the Maya were following the path of Venus through the year and building structures that align with the sunrise of the summer solstice and the sunset of the winter solstice. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, the Maya associated Venus not with love but war, and they would even schedule their battles to align with the planet's movement. As for Mars, the planet the West associates with war, the Maya carefully noted its retrograde motion. That is, it appears to reverse course for a while, which Ptolemy explained by saying it moves in epicycles because of his belief that celestial spheres orbited the stationary Earth. The real explanation is that the Earth and Mars both orbit the Sun in elliptical orbits, and at certain times of the year the Earth seems to overtake Mars, which will certainly appear strange to you if you insist the Earth doesn't move, while Mars looks as if it's doing a moonwalk. Who knows if the Maya deduced, as Kepler and Copernicus did, that the Earth and Mars move in relative motion around the Sun? So many of their codices were burned by Jesuit priests, the same people who condemned Galileo, who dismissed the mysterious Mayan script they couldn't read as devil's writ. Anyway, although much was achieved in astronomy with the naked eye, consider all that has been achieved in the centuries since the invention of the telescope, not just the kind descended from those Galileo and Newton used, but telescopes that can detect light outside the visible range, like X-ray, UV and radio telescopes, and the James Webb telescope, which sees in infrared. Even divine Urania, gazing up at the heavens, couldn't fathom this. Indeed, she could probably lay both her emblems aside and exchange them for one telescope. Anyway, to conclude, this will certainly be the most scientific of the episodes on the Muses, Urania being the most scientifically inclined of the 9. And yet it's interesting to muse on why astronomy was taught as one of the 7 liberal arts in medieval universities, with preparatory work being done in the trivium, i.e. grammar, logic and rhetoric, before the more advanced quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music and astronomy. As late as the 20th century, the physicist Richard Feynman records astronomy being taught as a humanities subject. And though we have long accepted there is no sound in space, no music, there is a poetry in the conceit that light falling into our telescopes and our eyes, after traversing unimaginable distances through space, has a mathematical kinship with that stringed instrument the Pythagoreans imagined could, to quote Shakespeare, make heaven drowsy with their harmony. So that's 2 muses down, 7 to go, and I haven't decided which one to tackle next. And there's still some big ones in there. Erato, muse of love poetry, Clio, muse of history, Melpomene of tragedy, Talia of comedy. So still a good few to go, and I'll have to have a think about which one to do next. The next episode, however, will be about the Western canon, a celebration and an interrogation of the idea of canonicity, in literature in particular, but I'll be taking a look at all the other arts, of course. Hope you join me then.